So to begin, my presentation, in the beginning half will be really about the forces pulling the fashion and the technology industry together. I want to talk about a few implications and opportunities of the coevolution of the fashion and technology industry. I want to conclude a little bit with about what I think technology can learn and borrow and co-opt from fashion, and also what I sort of speculate on what will be the future of fashion. So the fashion and the technology industry have, very different cultures. They also have a very different way of working. They have an entirely different vocabulary, which essentially means they have very different value systems. But one thing that they do really have in common is this obsession with newness, this obsession with innovation. So fashion, every single season, looks back into their past to reinterpret their future. And fashion designers are continually looking for new inspiration. They're looking for novel materials. They're looking for new technologies from other industries outside of their own to co-opt in order to make things that they could never have done in the past. So here we have a dress by Paco Rabanne, and this was made in sort of late 60s, early 70s. It's an iconic chainmail dress. And this dress is made from small metal pallets that were linked together. And this dress was made to the chagrin of someone like Coco Chanel, who did not consider Paco Rabanne a tailor. She considered him a metal worker because it was so revolutionary at that time. So we have that same concept, that same very dress made by Manish Ora in 2011. But the difference here is that Manish Ora used 3D body scanning technology in order to make each and every single palette fall and draped specifically to the body. So we have this reinterpretation of something that was novel in the past using today's technology that could never have been done. Paco Rabanne could not have made this type of chainmail dress back then, but now we can. So again, fashion is constantly reinterpreting and renewing through the use of technology. And of course, right now there's a lot of obsession with 3D printing. And of course, fashion designers have become really quite obsessed with this potential and these opportunities there. But 3D printing and wearables they're quite a clumsy fit right now. The materials are hard, they're expensive, the resolution is quite low. So why are designers so enamored by this process? Well, the simple result is that now you can make shapes, silhouettes, garments that could never have been done and made in the past. We're no longer working from 2D patterns to 3D, you're actually working in three-dimensional matter. And that is incredibly enticing for designers. And it's not just avant-garde designers working with 3D printing materials, it's companies that are investing in doing some research and understanding what the potentials of using 3D modeling technologies are. So New Balance has used 3D printing to create these pleats on these shoes that are highly customized for each athlete, and they're made, they're highly personalized to each athlete's biomechanical data. So what we're seeing now is sort of the future, if we look into the near future, where everything and all the objects in our world become embedded with sensing capabilities, they become embedded with intelligence, they have the ability to start to communicate with each other. It's not hard to imagine that our garments, the things that we wear every day, will be part of this larger ecology, of this larger Internet of Things. Right now, we're at the very, very nascent stages where we have our phone, our mobile phone as our hub for communication between a garment. None of these garments are networked. They can't communicate amongst each other. None of them really communicate into a larger ecosystem, and very few actually communicate with a whole. There aren't really many companies that have a line of products that are able to communicate amongst themselves. But soon we can imagine that wearables will be part of this larger ecosystem of things. And as a result, we see the fashion industry and the technology industry start to co-evolve together, and they start to compete for the space, the very, very finite space of your body. So what's happening here is just as we saw in the examples of 3D printing, we have a designer like Iris van Herpen who is pushing companies, like 3D printing companies like iMaterialize, to make 3D printed materials that are flexible, that are soft, that are perhaps even washable. So we will see this continuously happen as the co-evolution of the fashion and technology industry. We will see fashion push technology and technology push fashion in a way towards continual invention and continual newness. So what are the implications and opportunities? One, we currently see wearable technology mostly as accessories, little bracelets, watches, glasses that we put on the face. And for the fashion industry, this is actually quite a bit of a threat because accessories make a huge chunk of their profit. So the fashion industry is starting to pay attention to wearables. This is a spread. They had a 12-page spread in this year's September issue. And if you guys aren't familiar with the September issue, it's really the almanac of what is going to happen this next year of fashion. It was a 900-page behemoth issue of Vogue. But if you look at these images and the way that Google Glass is represented, it is a future I don't want to live in. It is dark. There are a bunch of it's all about surveillance, people watching each other. It's barren. So you can see, because fashion is amazing at telling stories, that there is high levels of skepticism, perhaps, in wearable technology. But the skepticism aside, I think there are opportunities specifically for the individuals in the fashion industry to become involved in the development and the creation of novel materials. So soon we're going to move, hopefully, away from just wearing a bunch of plastic to having a lot of these technologies integrated into textiles. And there are companies, of course, working on electronic textiles, but when you start to work with designers on a very, very fundamental level and bring designers in on a very early stage, not at the last stage to aestheticize these things, but begin to work with them early, you can make textiles and materials that are not only functional, that not only have performance qualities, but also have an aesthetic value. Over here on the left, you see examples of so I think those are like embroidered circuitry. We've got some conductive lace, and we've got an example of a solar panel bag where the solar panels are not just used; they're used more as palettes or as beads or as decorative materials. The other opportunities that really exist is, in the smart fabric space, but we need to start looking outside of the sort of US and European market and think about, well, what happens when our garments not only start sensing our bodies, but they also are aware of our environment? What happens when our garments become contextually aware? And how can our garments help indicate to us what is happening, what is invisible? How can they translate something that is invisible and make it visible to us? And here is a parka that actually monitors their environment and lets the user know when the pollution levels are too high in order for them to pull up a mask to protect themselves. And here's another great garment that is made from insect repellent fashion. So individuals living in countries that have issues with malaria, it's really difficult sometimes to get them to even spray something on, but everyone has to get dressed in the morning. So having garments that are desirable and functional that actually have an added functionality, an added level of protection to them can be a really nice way of making the usability and the safety and the protection of wearables and heightening that level. So the other opportunities, of course, exist in the collaboration between the fashion and the technology industry, but I would say that these collaborations really need to be authentic. We can't just crash Fashion Week, as Google Glass did last year, and expect all of a sudden Google Glass to be fashionable. We need to decide that these relationships that you decide on to work with the fashion industry are actually authentic to your brand and to your identity, because none of these girls who are all wearing Diane von Furstenberg right now, these are all fashion bloggers, would really be caught, I think, wearing Google Glass at its current design and at its stage. So when you start to think about collaborations with fashion houses, think about your particular culture's DNA and make sure that these collaborations make sense with the individuals that you begin to work with. Here's an example of one that actually was an interesting collaboration between a very young designer, Asher Levine, and he collaborated with a technology company that allowed him to embed essentially tracking devices into these high-end bags that he was making. So you're thinking, why do I want to put all this technology into a bag or into gloves? Well, if most of his audience is a bunch of club kids who have a lot of money. So if you are prone to being out and partying all night and losing your bag or leaving your pair of gloves behind, it maybe might make sense to start to embed some sort of level of technology to be able to retrieve and be able to find and locate your bags after you've forgotten about them the very next day. But the ultimate form of collaboration obviously has to make sense to both companies' DNA, and I think the collaboration, of course, with Nike and Apple makes quite a bit of sense, because the collaboration wasn't just about Nike, it wasn't just about Apple, it was really about creating this user experience for runners around music. And it was really about music. It was about the iPod and about music and how music is a motivational tool for runners and for athletes. You know, the great part of the user experience with this app is that you can program in a power song. So when you start to slow down, you have the option just to give yourself that boost, you know, and this is quite a nice example. So the other thing I want to really kind of mention, and this is really kind of a long topic, but is to think about how these wearables can start to create a new type of product, because we're going to start to create products that belong in a larger ecosystem. And instead of making products that compete just on functionality alone, just on features, we need to develop products that can live in a larger ecosystem and a larger community. Because no one runs very few people run 26 miles by themselves, but it's a lot easier to run with tens of thousands of people behind you. And we can start to create social products that have a way to create a certain cultural consciousness and a unique collective experience amongst us. And for companies that this doesn't make sense, not all products can be social, you can also start to create or think about how do you create a platform that is open for other people to contribute? How do you create these open creative platforms where others can start to make and develop and build off of your technology, because you have no idea how others will use a technology, because technology is constantly being co-opted and used in very creative and open ways, but people outside of your own industry. So this is the fun part. So what can we all here learn from fashion? So we are really good at making these really blank devices, devices that don't particularly have a very super strong brand voice. They all kind of look the same. But what we realize, if you look at the billion-dollar industry for customizing these wonderfully functional blank devices that we create, is the fact that our devices are just as intimate as the clothing we wear. So we want them to reflect who we are. We want them to be a way for ourselves to express ourselves. And with the current line of fitness and activity tracking devices sort of out there, you know, we start to sort of see a lot of sameness. There isn't that much differentiation. There isn't anything that completely shouts out at you, and especially when you're talking about smart watches. Watches in particular have such a rich heritage. They're strong symbols of status. For most men specifically, they tell a lot more about who you are than your fancy Italian shoes that you're wearing. So we need to really start to pay attention to what how these devices are made, particularly about the materials they're made from, because we can spot a Rolex from across the room, but you will not be able to differentiate which watch somebody's wearing in any of these from across the room on someone's wrist. And the way we tend to differentiate things in the technology industry is we make things in pink and turquoise, and I think we need to start to think beyond just color. Because fashion and expression and identity is more complex than just color and just style. So what I'm going to encourage everyone to do is to think about developing, because we're at a very young stage, we have the opportunity here to develop a signature style. A lot of these companies here are new. And here's a little quiz. Does anyone know who the designer for these shoes are? Anybody, shout it out. Okay. And why do you know this? Because? The signature red heel, okay? It's just a black shoe, you guys. But she knew immediately who the designer of this was. What about this bag? Who's the designer of this bag? Meg? Okay, it's an Hermes Kelly bag. And what about this? So who's the designer of this material fabric coat? Who? No, it's actually Issei Miyake, because it's from pleats. So these designers have used materials, color, form to create a signature that we all, not we all, but a lot of us would recognize from far away. And we have a huge opportunity here to do that, to differentiate ourselves with some of these products that we're creating, because some of these products have never existed before. But I would also encourage you not to only think about just the form, but also what is the user experience? What can be the signature style of our UX that we can create? Right now, wearables, the user experience is pretty open. We can have new gestures, new interaction models. All of these things are open for exploration, and it's a nice way for some of you guys to put a stamp on it and to make something your own. Okay, and materials. So materials matter. We don't like to wear plastic all the time. And if you've ever watched the making of the Hermes bag, which was one of the Kelly bags, and the amount of thoughts and detail that goes into making each of these handbags, the craftsmanship into this, you will understand why some people who can't afford it will pay $20,000 for a purse. So when we start to look at a lot of these wearables that are fighting, really, and competing for the finite real estate of our wrist, we need to consider the materiality. We have Misfit, who makes some leather bands. We also have Nike, who kind of came out with, it's still plastic, but they came out with a little rose gold clasp to make it a little bit more fashionable. So we can see that there is a little bit of thought being made, and towards trying to look into the materiality and the way these things feel against our skin and against our bodies. And the other thing that the fashion industry does phenomenally well is that they can tell a story. They can tell a very captivating story. Of course, every season, every time they have a runway show, they tell a story on stage. There's a lot of theater involved in fashion. But we can also tell a story uniquely through materials. And this is a great company who makes these cufflinks. And the story behind these cufflinks is that they're made from AK-47s. What this company, and of course white gold, but what this company does is they go into Africa, they buy back all these AK-47s, they take them, melt down the metal, and they make them into jewelry. And that is part of their material story, and it's a pretty profound one. So we can use materials to tell stories, not just marketing. So what do I foresee as the future of fashion? Will we all be running around in illuminated garments where we can download our patterns onto our dresses, or something even more ephemeral? Will we all be dressed in a cloud of smoke? To me, the future of fashion and our wearables really isn't going to look too much more different than what we're wearing basically today. Instead, what I imagine happening is that we'll have a lot of technology that is invisible, but will only be present when we need it. So this is a great project. It is a airbag for cyclists. So I guess it's on the left, or the right. We see the model wearing the scarf. It looks like a scarf. It comes in very different sizes and styles. But embedded inside the scarf is the capacity for this airbag to inflate if there seems to be, I guess, an accident that has happened when the individual is cycling. So the technology in this case is invisible. It's still fashionable and stylish. It's not taking anything away from your day-to-day way you look and feel, but it is always present. So for me, our garments in the future will essentially have a lot more functionality that they have more of an enhanced functionality to protect us, to also tell us a lot about who we are, and hopefully that will give us gathering all this data information will give us a lot of insight as to who we are today, and give us some information about the world we also live in. But all of this will happen. None of these wearables should detract from some of the more fundamental emotional parts of who we are as individuals, which is the ability to want to express ourselves and to share and communicate that through what we wear. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
I, of course, always have questions. So I don't know if Stan from Martian Watch is still here today, but I know that Andy from Meta Watch is here today. They had a little talk yesterday. A lot of it actually centered around, the smartwatch, not as a smartwatch, but as a watch that, as Andy likes to say, a watch that's smart, but also something that's not a piece of technology, but a piece of that emotional kind of charge that you get from putting something on. I actually happen to be wearing a Martian watch at the moment. I kind of like it. I mean, it kind of looks like a mechanical watch, sort of, actually. But anyway, so what sort of advice would you give Andy over at Meta, who's actually hard at work trying to figure out how to differentiate? And he had a great idea yesterday that actually just makes a ton of sense. It's, a lot of people don't just own one piece of jewelry. Mm-hmm. In fact, a lot of us don't even own just one watch. I happen to own 6 or 7 myself. From a fashion sense and the perspective that you've been outlining today, what would you tell Andy to focus on in terms of execution for those next generation designs?
I think
free consultation for you, Andy.
I think when it comes to watches, since they have such a strong heritage, there's so much craftsmanship that goes into sort of a watch. You need to figure out how to differentiate yourself beyond features, because those things are ephemeral or change. They're going to get sort of outdated. And so some of it has to do with design, of course, and a lot of it has to do with the materiality and the stories you can tell with using new and novel, unique materials and thinking about these things in different ways. Maybe a smartwatch doesn't have to look like a traditional watch. Maybe the materials can be a little different, but they don't necessarily need to all be made out of plastic. And I think getting into figuring out what is your particular brand's DNA, what makes you different. And when you ask that to a technology company, they're like, oh, we have longer battery life, or we have this feature and this feature. But what makes you different emotionally? Why would I want to buy this over that? Because those features are going to change in the next 6 to 9 months, So thinking about some of the more design features, which include the materiality of the story, the why, what you want to convey to your audience, and who your audience is. Every fashion company has a particular person they design for, even though they have a very broad audience, because fashion is aspirational. We buy things not because of who we think we're going to become and what it represents for us in the near future, not who we are just today, because that's kind of boring. Yeah.
Great. Yes?
Are any of the designers, so much of the fashion is active and it's out in the sun all day, is anybody combining solar recharging with fashion?
I think from what I've seen, there have been a lot of experiments done with that, but I think there's a lot of issues with, I saw some beautiful printed solar textiles, but there's just technical issues until that is sort of resolved in it. Right now, I think there's an interesting collaboration where there is a solar company working with a designer on a grassroots level. So if we're going to make textiles that are solar panels, we should also maybe make the patterns look a little bit more desirable. So a fashion designer will come and pick something out. Because right now, solar panels are kind of ugly. We've seen the solar panel backpacks and stuff. You don't really want to wear that around all the day. They look kind of geeky, So until we actually figure out how to make panels more soft and flexible, washable, and desirable from an aesthetic level, I don't think it's going to be embedded into the textiles quite yet, or at least I haven't seen it. Maybe there's stuff in R&D that I just haven't had exposure to.
Other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Oh, here. Anyone?
So with smartwatches and accessories, you can wear them every day or have a couple of them at the same time. But with clothing, you never wear a single piece of clothing every single day. So if you want to change it, even if it doesn't get dirty or whatever. Is anyone trying to tackle this problem? Because if there's going to be anything smart embedded into the clothing, you're easy to use every or most of the pieces of clothing that we own, or maybe only for a specific reason. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me as if it's going to proliferate to all of our industry.
I think we're a long ways away from having every piece of our garments be smart, but there are things that we wear generally continuously. That's why I think wearables have started off in the accessories realm. We tend to wear our watch or our, some of these things, accessories, or even, well, women don't wear their shoes all the time, the same pair of shoes all the time, but we carry a similar handbag with us on a daily basis. But I think what becomes interesting is when we can have our garments, like our bag, talk to our shoes, we can talk to our watch, so there will always be something on us that might be connected. We might not be wearing the same thing, but we might be wearing one out of the 5 things daily, and if they can all communicate amongst each other, then it becomes most likely you can have a continuous sort of stream of information that you're gathering by yourself. But I don't think every single thing we buy from the Gap is going to be smart anytime soon. Yeah, and I don't know if it needs to be.
Oh, sorry. Don't know what happened there.
It's okay.
Okay, so.
See, I'm an electrical engineer, and I have a product that's right now wearable technology that's failing miserably on Kickstarter. It's just crashing and burning really hard. And I had a lot of criticism from my engineering colleagues when I was creating it because it was driven from the design side rather than from the electronics side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it has kind of, it's not so much fashion as it's sort of an art form.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to someone like me who's sort of off here in this world trying to be somewhere that's quite different?
Well, I'm going to just sort of give an anecdote, or I guess a metaphor. Women in general, or people in general, will wear a pair of shoes that are not functional. They'll make them bleed, all night long. But they will not wear a pair of shoes that are super comfy and ugly. So if you don't think fashion or the way something looks matters, then you're wrong, because if you're putting on your body, it's the way you feel about yourself. It's the way people perceive you. It's entirely important that what you wear or what you have on you be something that you feel comfortable with and you feel like reflects who you are. So design is super important, because often with garments, we will forfeit functionality for design. So that's sort of my story behind that. So I'm not sure what your project is. So I'm not quite sure what it's failing. It's not connecting emotionally with people, or?
I really just think that I'm not finding an audience. I think the people who are going to Kickstarter are not looking for the design element. So I guess really my question is, how do I get more into the women's market, basically, for wearables?
Right. I don't think there is a men's and women's market for wearables sort of quite yet. I don't think, that we can sort of differentiate it. But I think the women's market for wearables is any women's market. If you create a product that is desirable for a woman and it has we're not averse, most women are not averse to technology. So it's that they'll basically want it. So I would just get in touch with people that are basically, imagine who you want to buy that product and find other people who have that particular audience and start to collaborate, work, or have that conversation amongst them. Because I don't think there's a women's niche market for wearables. I don't think that exists. I just think you need to figure out who you want your audience to be, or you want to focus on, and then try to find people where they are. Find where they're going. Are they hanging out at Lululemon? Go figure out what that is and try to approach them from that perspective. You're welcome.
Yes.
I am here, so I'm standing from Martian.
Oh, you are here. Okay.
So I wasn't going to jump up then, but it's very interesting. We did start out, we have an analog watch, and you do what you can with an electronic product. And it's very interesting that in the electronics world, a woman asked, I was on a panel yesterday, asked about her acrylic bracelet, and there's this lady that asked acrylic bracelet that's $300 and you add electronics to it, now it has to sell for $99. And we faced a little of that from the standpoint of trying to figure out how you break into the fashion side, into distribution, into getting into Nordstrom's as opposed to Best Buy. What do you think is going to be the breakthrough that takes our world into the fashion world? How do you foresee that? I mean, Samsung can spend their $100 million on ads, Google can get on the runway with Vogue and others, but for most of us that aren't those companies that can buy our way into it, what do you think is the product that you envision that really makes a break? I mean, we envision should we make a $10,000 version of Martian? Very mechanical, very unique, very designing, but then sneak, an OLED inside or something, or a PCB. How do you see it coming about?
I think it's actually quite simple. I think you need to collaborate with the fashion company. I mean, that's what you need to do. Find a company, that's what I was saying in my presentation, that has the same DNA that you think you want to, that work with, that has an audience, that has a vision of where they're going as a fashion company and where you're going as a technology company, and work with them. Because for you to understand the fashion industry and gain that market, I mean, these companies have been around for a very, very, very long time. You know, to try to do that on your own, it's going to take years and years and years of development. And if you don't have the money like Google to crash a runway show, then it's going to be very difficult for you to do. But why not do a collaboration with the fashion company? Why not find somebody that you want to work with and grow together? Because I mean, the fashion industry is skeptical about wearable technology. It's because they don't like the way it looks, you know, and they don't like basically the fact that it's all the same. There is no voice in it. There is no personalization. There's no story. There's no materiality. But that's the stuff that they're good at, hence the vocabulary issue. Why don't you work with people that are really good at what they do, and work together and help each other go up this way, you know, rather than trying to learn their world, because it's going to take a long time before you do that.
Other questions? Yes?
Yeah, do you think like the Google Glass will like ultimately get mass adoption within like the fashion world? Would it be better off to have, like partnering with like a Warby Parker, or like somebody who's a real like glassware manufacturer?
There's rumor that Google is partnering with Warby Parker. I have no idea if that's true. The problem I have with Google Glass is that it's asymmetrical and it closes your eyes, so when you're talking to someone, it's really awkward because you can't see them. The asymmetry is really weird because our faces are symmetrical. I mean, but those are basic, I think, design issues, and some of them are because the decisions were made because of technology and whatnot. But and also the fact is that when we pick glasses, our faces are different shapes. So when we pick glasses, we pick shapes of glasses that accommodate and flatter our face, and Google Glass is one shape. It's a one-size-fits-all problem. So I think when they start to partner with a company like Warby Parker, who understands all of this stuff and who can make the frames, then it'll become easier for Google Glass to get more adopted. I mean, there's other issues with glass besides just the way it looks, but the way it looks is the first and easy thing to attack glass for, because it's weird. So.
Other questions? Yes?
For companies like Apple and Google, I think if you spend enough money to get the design right, the outward appearance, because Apple's been known for design, and Samsung can buy design from Burberry or somebody to incorporate it in there.
Right.
But do you think it's the brand image that's affecting it? Like, you know, do you think it's better for Armani, rather for Armani to create a technical device that would be more appealing to consumers than a technical company making a fashion device or a fashion?
That's why I think it has to be sort of a mutual collaboration again. You know, Apple recently hired 2 major people from the fashion industry. I'm not sure what they're up to. I don't necessarily know if it's wearables related. One of them I think is more retail sort of focused. But you know, they did hire the woman, the CEO for Burberry, and she's super smart, you know, and she's doing really interesting things in that space because she understands what the whole connected consumer experience is, and the Apple stores are kind of fun, but they're not connected in that way that they should be. Anyway, that's a different conversation. But so I think that if the collaboration sort of is mutual, I feel like if you get a company like Armani, I mean, just making smartwatches without a technology company sort of behind it, I don't know how seriously people are going to take it, you know, to that level. But but at the same time, if you have just technology companies making watches that are desirable, people sort of aren't going to want it either. So, but you know, I mean, Prada's made smartwatches in not that long ago. I think probably 4 or 5 years ago. And they look actually quite nice. I'm not sure what the functionality was or who they collaborated with, but Prada didn't make it. You know, they obviously collaborated with somebody. But if you start to partner with a brand that's really strong like Prada, you might get lost sort of in that translation. So there has to be a balance between your brand and their brand, and because you don't want to get trumped by Prada and then nobody knows who you are either. So there's another issue that you have to resolve there in terms of the way the collaborations work. Yeah.
So I have one last question because that's what we have time for. What would you say, or how would you describe what Apple does right in terms of that emotional attachment, the look and feel. For example, I refuse to put a case on my iPhone 5S in champagne. I just refuse to do it because I lose the emotional attachment. It just doesn't feel right. So how can you summarize what Apple does right? Because there's, I think, a major lesson there for a lot of wearable tech companies.
Yeah, I mean, Apple has, what they've really done is they've created a really sort of elegant, minimal device, you know, and their materials, they pay attention to it. Because even actually, I have the 5C, the plastic one, and I actually like the way it feels kind of better than the other because they've paid attention just to the curve of their edges. You know, there's like the nuances and the obsessiveness towards detail that they've been paying quite a bit of attention to. But I would still argue, but for someone who's 14, 15, 20, like people like putting cases on because it's fun. Apple is nice and it's elegant, but they're missing that fun, that playfulness, that expressiveness element to it, you know? And not everybody wants, they like buying it, they like opening up this white pristine box and pulling out their iPhone, and then they're like, okay, now I'm gonna put bunny ears on it because that's who I am, you know? Like, and that's what expresses me. So I think it's to each his own, you know?
Interesting, there's actually probably a lesson there for the smartwatch folks. Okay, so unfortunately we are out of time. Syuzi, thank you, that was awesome.
Thank you.